Today on our 2016 Ford F-350 Super Duty, we're going to be installing Airlifts Ultimate Air Helper Springs, part number AL88396. These air helper springs are going to offer up to 5,000 pounds of carrying capacity. Now this doesn't increase the load carrying capacity of your vehicle, it just supports it. So when you've got a heavy load in the back, it'll help you maintain proper ride height. This proper ride height will restore handling that was lost because of the geometry of your suspension being different than what it was before. It'll help return your headlights down to center instead of being pointed up in the air. And since each one has its own independent air fitting, you can adjust for uneven loads and get it level from side to side. This is a custom design for your Ford F-350. They're going to help improve ride quality when you've got it loaded down, and they're also going to help reduce sway because they're going to work with one another and with your existing suspension. They're going to help keep the vehicle from rocking back and forth and bring it back to level. And with these you get the best of both worlds because they're not only airbags that provide you with all the adjustability that comes along with that, but inside there's a jounce bumper. So under extreme heavy loads, you hit some large pothole or have a big dip in the road, you have that jounce bumper there that's going to provide that extra layer of support when needed. This is a no-drill installation and it comes with all the hardware you need to get it installed. We'll show you that now. We'll begin our installation under the vehicle at the rear on our driver's side. Now you will need to use a floor jack or something else. We do have our vehicle on a lift, so we're using pole jacks to lift the vehicle up slightly to give us additional clearance between our axle and our frame. We'll need to remove our jounce bumpers on each side. On our driver's side here, we do have wiring that runs over it, and it may be in the way, so you can pop the clip out here with a trim panel tool or a pair of needle nose pliers. We're just going to get behind it and just pop that right out, and that'll allow us to maneuver it out of the way. Now we'll remove our nut from the stud out of our jounce bumper using a 15mm socket. And we'll just set that aside as we won't be reinstalling it. And we'll make sure we take out our passenger side as well. We'll now install our bracket. We'll take our M8 bolt that comes in the kit. You'll know that's the metric bolt because of the 8.8 metric bolt rating on it. We'll slide a flat washer on it. Slide it through our bracket. And then slide our bracket through the existing hole in the frame. We want to make sure we don't pinch our wiring, so you may have to maneuver it around to keep our wiring safe. On the back side, we're going to place another washer, followed by a nylon locking nut. Next, we'll take the 1/2 inch by 1 1/4 inch bolt, placing on a 1/2 inch flat washer. We're going to slide it through the hole towards the front. It's kind of a cutout more than it is a hole. That'll go through the elongated hole in the frame. And on the back side, we'll be placing our 1/2 inch flat washer, followed by the serrated nut. Now we'll perform some pre-assembly on our airbag. We'll take one of the roll caps, place that on top of our airbag, lining up the opening with the location where our air valve goes. We'll thread our air valve in until it stops by hand. We'll then tighten it down using a 1/2 inch wrench, 1 1/2 turns. So there's 1 1/2. We can now flip it over, and on the bottom side we're going to place another one of our roll caps. Next we'll assemble our lower bracket. We'll be taking the lower bracket with the flanges facing up, placing the seat mount on top of it. The square hole there will line up with the elongated hole here. We'll take one of these small carriage bolts that comes in the kit, sliding it down. On the other side, we'll take a flat washer, followed by a lock nut. And we're just gonna snug that down a little bit for now. We don't want to fully tighten it yet. We just kind of want to get some of the play out of it, but we still want to be able to maneuver it around. We'll now take our bracket, we're going to flip it over. And since this is going to be on the driver's side, it'll be sitting in this orientation in the vehicle. We want to place one of the long carriage bolts down through the square hole that would be towards the rear of the vehicle. And now we'll attach it to our airbag. So the opening here, you want to make sure you got it the same on the opposite side here on the top. That's where our air fitting is. We want our bracket to be facing away from the fitting. So this little notch here needs to be on the opposite side of our fitting. We'll set it on and line it up with the holes in our airbag. We want to use the hole that's directly outward from our carriage bolt on one side, and then that middle bolt for these remaining 3 over here. We use the black tapered screws to connect it to our airbag. We'll then tighten those down using a 7/32 Allen key. We'll then torque our hardware to the specifications found in our instructions. We'll now take our upper mount brace. It does look a little bit different than your passenger side. Your driver's side has a flange here, whereas your passenger sides will just have a straight edge. We're going to slide our medium-sized carriage bolt down through the hole there, and then 2 of the shorter carriage bolts through both of those openings there. We'll now flip it over and place it on top of our airbag and line it up with the holes. We'll now take the finer thread hex head bolts that come in the kit, place on a lock washer followed by a flat washer, and connect those to our airbag. We'll then tighten and torque our hardware using a 9/16 socket. We can now lift our airbag assembly into place, making sure to maneuver our brackets and hardware around any lines and wiring that may be there. We also want to make sure that our long carriage bolt goes between the axle and the brake line. And your airbag can squish and move a little bit, so you may need to do that to get her to go into place. We want the lower bracket to sit where our old jounce bumper used to hit there. We then need our long bolt here to slide into the hole where we removed our jounce bumper. You want to make sure you place your spacer on it with the wider edge facing towards the outside of the vehicle. Just bend it down and line that up with the hole. Then we can take the bracket that we previously installed and line it up with the bolts that we slid through our upper bracket here. For the bolt that went through the frame where our jounce bumper was, we'll be using a serrated nut, threading that on. Onto each bolt, we'll place a flat washer and then install a nylon locking nut. Next, we'll take our other long carriage bolt. We're going to slide that down through the square opening in our lower bracket. On the bottom side, we'll place our axle brace here, where it clamps onto the axle. And then on the end of each of those carriage bolts, we'll place a flat washer, followed by a nylon locking nut. Next, we'll take our U-bolt. We're going to slide it up behind the leaf spring. We're going to then bring it through, and we want to go in the highest holes that we can in our lower bracket. This is going to vary depending on the thickness and package you may have on your leaf springs. On ours, we can get it in the top slots. We'll then place a flat washer followed by a locking nut onto each end of the U-bolt. We can now go back and tighten down our hardware. We're going to start with the top bracket. The small bolt, we'll use a 13mm socket and wrench. And our large bolt, we'll use a 19mm socket and wrench. You may need to switch sides and put your wrench on the inside to get it to tighten down. Now we'll tighten the bolts for our upper airbag bracket and our frame bracket using a 15mm socket. When you tighten on the bolt that goes through the frame, you want to make sure that your spacer is parallel with the frame in your bracket here. And then we can tighten that one down while also using a 15mm socket. Then we'll go back and torque down all that hardware using the specifications found in your instructions. Now we'll tighten down our U-bolt using a 15mm socket. I'm going to go back and forth, making sure to tighten that down evenly. And then we'll tighten down our lower axle bracket. You'll again want to go back and forth to make sure it's even, but you also want to verify that you're not going to hit the brake line or any other line with your bolts when tightening them down. You may or may not need to cut off the end of these bolts after you've got them up so far, depending on the length of your socket. On this particular one here, I did have to trim off about 1 inch in order to allow my deep welt to still make contact with the nut to tighten it down. Now we can go back and torque our carriage bolts and our U-bolts. We'll use a 15mm socket to do that. With everything else tightened and torqued, we still have a bolt located underneath our airbag that connected our saddle here to the lower bracket. We tightened that during pre-assembly but didn't get it all the way tight. You need to use a 13mm wrench and just go in there and snug that back up. With the driver's side being done, you'll do the same procedures on your passenger side with a few minor exceptions. Your upper bracket is only attached to the frame with one large bolt. It doesn't have that small bolt. And you'll need to apply a heat shield to your exhaust here to protect your airbag from the excessive heat coming off your exhaust. Next we'll need to route our air lines. It comes as one giant piece of line with fittings on each end, so you'll want to extend that line out, fold it in half, and cut 2 equal lengths. When you cut those, you want to make sure that you cut it square. You can pick up special airline cutting tools here at etrailer.com. Once you've cut your line, you'll take the end that you just cut and you just push it into the fitting on the top of your airbag, just like we did here. Then we just took our airline and we followed our frame rail and our factory wiring all the way down towards the back of the vehicle. You want to make sure you avoid any moving objects and excessively hot objects. If you follow your factory wiring, it's already routed in a way to avoid these. Once we got towards the end, we did coil up the excess that we had, so this way we have some in the future in case we ever need to make any repairs or add a compressor system. We then took them and ran them through the holes where our license plate would go. And so this way our license plate just mounts to the air fittings. And ours is a work truck here, as you can see, but it'll work fine with your standard truck as well. You just need to pop out those plastic inserts that you use your bolts to attach your license plate and poke your air hose through the holes that existed already. We then use the 2 nuts, flat washer, star washer, and rubber nut that come with our kit. And we thread those onto our hose to secure it to our license plate. Now you can air them up and check for leaks. Air them up in short bursts because a small amount goes a long way. Now we'll check for leaks. You want to spray your fittings to make sure it's not leaking at any of the ends. We're using some soapy water and we're looking for bubbles. The presence of bubbles will indicate an air leak. We have no bubbles here, so now we're going to go to our airbags and we're going to spray on the fittings coming out of there. Make sure we're good there as well. And with no leaks, you're all set. Now just verify that you don't have any hoses or lines that are rubbing on anything. So you can see here we took our parking brake cable that was rubbing on the side of our airbag and we zip tied it down to the bottom lower bracket. You just want to check any other lines and do the same. And that completes our installation of Airlift's Ultimate Air Helper Springs on our 2016 Ford F-350 Super Duty.